Good afternoon, everyone. Dave March here, and welcome to Everything Energy. Today, we have a fantastic discussion that I really have been looking forward to. But a little bit of housekeeping. So today's discussion is decarbonizing old buildings, and more importantly, making the residents happy. You are on mute, and this is being recorded. If you have any questions, please put them into the chat and we'll get to them. If we do not get time to answer everybody's questions, we will provide answers through the comments to this video when it's posted on LinkedIn tomorrow or so. So don't feel bad if you didn't get all your questions answered. So we will certainly get to those. So to sort of start off today, I want to tell a little bit of a story as an intro here. And I have a son and daughter-in-law that live in Manhattan. And I go visit them in the middle of the winter time. And of course, they have a small apartment like, most young couples in Manhattan. Go visit them. It's snowing. It's freezing cold out there. And I go to their apartment and the window's open. You kind of like, what is going on here? Oh, well, we've got these steam radiators. It's either too hot or too cold. You can't control it and everything else. And here I am. I'm in the energy space, right? Exergy Energy is a concierge utility. I walk out from there and I go like, this is nuts. There's got to be some solution to this. Literally, I look up as I'm walking down the street and I see open windows in the middle of wintertime. And I think, okay, this is kind of crazy. I was super just serendipity and just lucky to get introduced to a firm that has actually solved this problem. And I thought, we should share that with you. So welcome, Matthew Issacs. Matthew is the VP of Business Development and Sales at Radiator Labs. So, Matthew, thank you so much for joining.
David, thank you for having me.
Yeah, give me a quick introduction to Radiator Labs, and then I'm going to be pounding you with lots of questions.
Totally. Well, you kind of identified that main problem, right? Radiators, first of all, I want to say radiators are incredible. There's nothing that you could buy today that would last a century or a century and a half, as radiators have. But over time, these buildings have become very unbalanced. So, we're generally catering to the coldest areas in the building to, make sure we can, meet statutory heating requirements. Yeah. And in doing so, you see all those open windows in the middle of the winter. Radiator Labs is a decade-old startup conceived out of Columbia University. The founder, Marshall Cox, was miserably overheated in his dorm room, just like your child is in New York City today. And, there had been some previous valve-type inventions in the 1960s and 70s. Mostly those were invented in Europe, where it's hot water in the radiators instead of steam. And they were pretty ubiquitous, here in the Northeast or across the U.S., actually. Because, the problems existed and there's been nothing really to address it. And what Marshall conceived of was a box, but it's a total outside of the box type solution. Our foundational technology is called the COZY. It's technically known as a thermostatic radiator enclosure. It's an insulated radiator cover with a vent, a fan, some sensors, and buttons. And this allows for room by room temperature control in a radiator heated building, which is unheard of in that building stock.
I was going to ask you about the origin story. I was going to put my head down and say, you see all the gray hair? I grew up with steam radiators, right? And it just reinforced in me that old saying, hatred is the mother of invention, right? So I was kind of curious what the origin story of Radiator Labs was. So it was his dorm room. I actually had the same situation in my dorm room. We had steam radiators and literally our windows were open all winter long. It was absolutely crazy. Now, from what you just said, understand it is you're not replacing the radiator or you're not replacing the heating system or anything else. So help me understand this incredibly complicated technical thing. It's a thermo something insulated.
That's right. Yeah. So think radiator cover. Yeah, we're absolutely not replacing the radiators, and we're not replacing the central boiler control and all the pipes and risers that connect all of it. That stuff has been in place for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And just to give you a sense of scale of this problem, pretty much every large building built in a colder climate pre-1980 is radiator heated.
Wait,
Those
pre-1980, most of them are still radiators? Wow.
That's correct. Yeah, in the single family homes, you probably see a lot of forced air starting in the 50s, but large buildings, you didn't have ducting and central air systems until about the 80s. So radiators are very, very common out there. What we do is we build custom metal insulated radiator covers that have a computer, sensors, a brain, a vent, and a fan. And I can load up a slide, which I'll do in a second, to kind of explain how that works, because there's a big aha moment with it. Let me put that up on the screen.
All right, let me make sure I can get it out there for you. Okay.
Great. Let's move this.
There we go.
Cool. So on the left, you can see kind of what one of our covers looks like, but there are all types of radiators. We make the cover size doesn't really matter. The radiator type doesn't matter. We make an insulated cover, and in the center of it, there's buttons where users can walk right up to the cover itself and adjust their heating temperature the same way they would use a window AC. And if the room falls beneath the desired set point for that room, the fan will turn on and circulate heat into the room. If the room is at set point or is above set point, the fan won't circulate at all, and the remaining heat or energy that a radiator emits will be trapped inside of the cover. And that's kind of when the energy savings magic happens. We can get into that.
Okay, so one question then is, it's insulated. Got that. So if I walk over and I put my hand on it, can I fry eggs on it or something, or will I not notice anything?
No, absolutely not. It's child and pet safe. You could cook, it'd be warm if you put your hand on it, but you could keep your hand on it indefinitely without hurting yourself.
Okay.
Some people think it's a valuable amenity, having new usable space, a shelf or a place to sit by the window or put things. But ultimately, it's a very simple, solution to a century-old problem. And if you think about it, it's really hard to control steam because that's anti-gravity and just flows where in ways that are hard. They're steam experts or master venters, and they can't really figure it out. But it's really easy to control air. So we kind of turn these radiators into heat batteries and forced air systems at the same time. So on a room-by-room basis, you now have temperature control. But on a building-wide basis, you are manipulating the condensation rate of steam inside of each one of these radiators, and you're experiencing massive energy savings.
Okay. Let me first ask the question more, as I said, decarbonizing old buildings and making residents happy. I'm going to focus first on the residents being happy here. So one reason we hated steam radiators was the simple reason is you can never control it, right? Just never could control it. The other one is there wasn't any circulation in the room either. Right. So you had this extremely hot thing. And I remember touching a steam radiator, you could burn your hands on, right? You had a extremely hot thing on one side of the room and nothing on the other side. Right. So I'm assuming that not only are you able to control the temperature, but you're able to much better balance the temperature profile of the room. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, the heating in the room is much more balanced post installation. If you think about a radiator, right, it's just metal. If it's a large cast iron radiator, it's a lot of metal. And steam is self-limiting in temperature. It gets up to 100 Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So yeah, if you touch that, it's going to burn yourself. You're going to hurt yourself for sure. But it heats a room via convection and radiation, and we kind of alter that and allow the forced air to just hit the furthest reaches of the room. But most of these rooms, if you think about it, truly are overheated rather than underheated. So what our technology primarily does is kind of eliminate all of those wasted BTUs that are overheated and usually wind up just flying out the window.
Understand. So now going into sort of the energy savings. Now, to me, it's of course viscerally obvious, right? If I'm walking down the street and I look up and it's the middle of winter and somebody's got their their window open. I know there's a lot of energy going out. But I have no feel for what that really means. So let's take, and I am totally ignorant of this, so I'm going to rely on you here. We've got a building. Give me a classic New York City old building, apartments, blah, 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 right?
Totally, yeah.
And it's called the Cozy, right? I think is what you said.
The product's called the Cozy. The utilities refer to it as this thermostatic radiator enclosure. Or you can just think of it as a smart radiator cover.
Yeah, I like Cozy. So we'll stick with Cozy. I don't get too confused here. But if you took sort of a standard, again, older apartment buildings, steam radiators and things like that, and you retrofitted, I guess that's the term you could use, with Cozies, what was the energy consumption before, when everybody was unhappy and had their windows open, versus the energy saving after the Cozy? What are we really talking about savings here?
I mean, it's significant. It's probably the most significant energy efficiency technology you could deploy in a steam radiator heated building. On average, we'll save 25% on heating energy or heating expenses. But if you think about it, obviously that varies depending on how the building's being heated, whether it's natural gas or fuel oil deliveries. And it also depends on how efficient or inefficient the building is to begin with. There are some buildings where we save well over 40%. So if it's a 100-unit building and the building, whether it's a co-op or it's a rental building, someone's paying, say, $100,000 a year to heat that building with steam, and we save 40%, it's significant.
And now, does those savings include the electricity savings from me dialing the super all the time to complain about?
No, that would be impossible to calculate. But as I mentioned, Marshall invented this core technology of ours at Columbia University, and we're widely deployed there. And not many organizations track how many heating complaints or maintenance calls they get, but Columbia does. And it just turns out when you give somebody control over their temperature, they stop calling. But beyond that, our system, right? So a Cozy is this insulated radiator cover, but a system is dozens or hundreds of them networked to each other and with information in the cloud and connected to the building's central heating plant. Our Cozy system is tracking room temperature at all times. It's tracking the radiator temperature at all times. It's tracking steam trap health at all times, and we don't need to get into what steam traps are. But all of that information is getting sent to the cloud. The room temperature algorithm is getting fed into the boiler controller, so the boiler controller is not, creating more steam if the building's already above a desired, overall, temperature set point. And the radiator, the room and radiator information can be really telling about a building's envelope or other inherent issues in the building. And historically, when someone is having problems with their heat, supers just knock on apartment doors and touch pipes. We can really pinpoint those issues.
So we've gone from I can't control anything and I'm always unhappy and uncomfortable to we now have like real-time feedback on a room-by-room basis. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. So you're taking kind of just metal and pipes and making it into a digital modern system and optimizing the performance of that steam distribution system. And that's what we do.
All right. So given what you just told me, I have a feeling this is not a retail product. I'm not going to go to Bed Bath & Beyond, which I don't know exists anymore. I think they filed bankruptcy, but I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm not going to go buy a Cozy at Bed Bath & Beyond. This sounds like it's more the building owner is your ultimate customer. Help me to understand.
Yeah, whoever's paying for the fuel that heats that building, and usually it's a boiler that's also making hot water, and then in wintertime it goes into overdrive and makes steam, or it heats up the water even more and circulates hot water in a hot water or hydronic building. Whoever's paying for that is our customer, but anyone who interfaces with that building also enjoys the benefit, and the amenity of temperature control and maybe new aesthetics, different radiator covers, a usable piece of furniture you can put stuff on. But radiator heated buildings are everywhere, right? They can be office buildings, they can be multifamily buildings, and multifamily is where the problem is most pronounced because people live live with these
24/7,
live in
right?
uncomfortable temperatures. But
Yeah.
most of our schools, at least in New York City, were built in the 1930s and 1950s. That means they're radiator heated too. And municipal buildings are a large customer segment of ours. So it could be a municipality that's paying for the fuel, or a landlord, or a condo or co-op organization. But they're the ones that will experience all of the energy savings, while the people using the building will experience the amenity of comfort.
Considering that people, have different decors and preferences and things like that, so I'm kind of curious. And you used I think you said 100-unit apartment building sort of as an example. Let's assume, and I'm just making numbers up here, Matt.
Sure.
2 rooms per apartment, that would be 200 cozies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do they? And I'm sorry to ask this silly question, but do the residents in this circumstance get to choose colors or textures or something like that? Or does the building owner say it's going to be, it's any color you want as long as it's beige or something like that?
Yeah, it really depends on the customer's preferences. In a situation where, it's a rental building and, the apartments turn over and everything's universal, they probably would wind up getting whatever the building owner chose, white or beige or something like that. But we do also retrofit lots of co-op buildings, right? And those people have invested in their apartments, and oftentimes they've made their own radiator covers. And in some cases, we'll go ahead and retrofit their existing cabinetry with our insulation and our technology.
Really?
That, the technology can look like anything. We do it at scale. So we address very large properties today because that's where the majority of the energy savings are, the majority of the decarbonization is. And it also kind of syncs with our ethos to decarbonize schools or social housing. And in those types of campuses or campus style properties or places like that, it's generally you'll see us pretty standard looking cover, but we've certainly done high-end apartment buildings where people have very different aesthetics in varying apartment by apartment.
So you can do, I'll call it, in those particular cases of a condo unit or something, you can do sort of a custom retrofit. It's the same parts.
That's
we're just
right.
using their, and you can do colors, et cetera. In a general, I don't mean the term general purpose, but in a sort of a normal apartment building, it's probably a single color because they would have gotten that anyway when they rented the apartment, whatever the radiator.
Pretty much. I'm gonna change the screen just to show some examples of these covers in action, and
And one looks like a bongo to me there. Oh, it's a snack bongo, right? Okay.
It's interesting. That's in an office building, and they do have a big bongo. Maybe they hit the drum when a new deal happens or something. But yeah, the cozy is on top of a cast iron radiator, and it's right behind that bongo in the upper right corner. There's a bunch of baseboard style ones underneath windows. We do a lot of what's called convectors, and I don't see a lot of examples of this, but those are thin tube radiators that are inside of walls that already have a metal radiator cover on them. So we're just replacing it with one that's 70 years newer, most likely.
What you're gathering all this data from each cozy, room by room, et cetera, et cetera. You're feeding that back. And again, I apologize for my ignorance. You're going to feed that back to the building. I'll call it the furnace controller.
Sure. Yeah, it's generally a boiler, right? Because it's water based.
Yeah.
But yeah, that boiler has a controller. The older ones are kind of based on dials, and they usually have an outdoor temperature sensor. Newer ones have indoor temperature reset, and that adds a lot of savings complexity to it. And that indoor temperature reset is usually based on a few sensors in the building to get an idea of what the temperature is inside. Mm-hmm. Our system feeds temperature data from nearly every room in the building to that boiler controller as a very rich data set for indoor temperature reset.
Do you typically have to replace the boiler controller to take advantage of all of the data richness of your product?
Yeah, most buildings in New York City have some type of internet-enabled smart boiler controller in them. It's just the economics, that type of energy efficiency project makes sense. If a building does it and we're installing cozies, we'll generally upgrade it to a more modern internet-enabled boiler controller.
How intrusive, and I don't mean that in a negative way.
No. I'm glad you asked.
I got my, I have my apartment and things like that. And my building owner decides he wants to upgrade to cozies. How long does it take? How screwed up is my apartment? Give me some idea of what I'm in for here.
Sure.
As a resident,
I will say every building is different. So with that said, I think as an intrusiveness level to our projects, it's probably a 2 out of 10. And we're going to talk about the alternatives in just a few minutes, I'm pretty sure. But essentially, we custom design these radiator covers so they don't take up additional square footage and go on relatively easy. Sometimes there's some on-site modifications, that are made if necessary, but it's generally half an hour to an hour per radiator, or and a team of 2 or 3 can handle an apartment in an hour. So, within an hour's time, your radiators have been retrofitted. You now have temperature control, and the building is much greener.
I'm sorry, it's much leaner, did you say?
Oh, no, greener. Yeah, it's definitely leaner too. But yeah, no, it's a much more efficient, decarbonized. It's using less fossil fuels to provide you heating.
Yeah. Let's explore that for a second. Again, you're in New York City. So the first one is anywhere from 30, 40, potentially 50% energy savings. Does that translate sort of 1-to-1 or proportionally to carbon footprint, at least with regard to those scope 1 heating emissions?
So it's, again, hard to say, but in New York City, we passed a very progressive climate legislation where all buildings' energy, a building's entire energy usage is calculated. So all of its electricity usage is tabulated, and all of its natural gas usage, whether it's for cooking gas or laundry machines or the boiler that does hot water and heating, it's all tabulated. And each gas or each fuel, right? If that building's using heating fuel oil instead of gas, that has a different carbon intensity, and electricity has a different carbon intensity, right? And that ultimately one day will be zero, right? When the grid is totally renewable. I think today it's like 94 or 95% of New York State's grid is at least from what I don't quote me on this, but I think it's mostly powered by fossil fuels at this point, but we're creating a lot of renewable energy. So all of those things will be taken into account. And if the building's energy usage and carbon computation is over a certain limit for that building's usage type, right? If it's a hotel, it's got a different limit than an apartment building, and then if it's an office building, et cetera.
Right.
If it's over its limit on a per square foot basis, it will pay a carbon fine based on how many tons of carbon it's over that limit. So a lot of buildings in New York City today are going on carbon diets, so to speak. And a modern office building with central AC is not a building that we could retrofit. But those older legacy classic buildings that are heated with radiators and don't have ducting, they have window units for air conditioning, our technology is going to provide the most carbon bang for the buck.
And if they don't do it, and then again, I'm just extrapolating here, if they don't do it, they could literally face fines, right?
That's
Essentially, they have to pay for carbon offsets or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is still being clarified. There may be offsets allowed. No one's been fined yet, right? It's 2025 is that first fine year. So we'll find out exactly how it shakes up. But New York City is committed to decarbonization. Our buildings in New York City emit 70% of the city's carbon. So transportation is way behind in a city like New York. And buildings are going to be retrofitting in order to meet these standards.
Great. So a question then, it's not me, the apartment owner. Like I said, I'm not going to Bed Bath & Beyond and buying a cozy here or getting it through Amazon. So it's going to be the building owner. Building owners, we know one thing is they don't like to have nasty phone calls about their radiators, but they also are very financially oriented.
Sure.
So if I can put you on the spot, and I know it's a range, I understand all that kind of stuff, but what would a building owner be looking at as a payback period or an internal rate of return or something like that?
Yeah, the simplest answer, and we sell this multiple ways, but the simplest answer is the ROI is instantaneous. We can sell this. We can use the utility rebate and the investment tax credit from the Inflation Reduction Act and some creative finance to deliver an entire system to a building at zero cost upfront to the building owner.
Zero. I'm the
yeah.
building owner. Nothing out of pocket for me. Is that
That's
right?
correct. Yeah, and then they'll experience lots of energy savings. We'll charge them an annual subscription, but that subscription will always be way less than what they're saving. So instantaneous ROI. We also do sell it as an upfront purchase to organizations that want to experience all of the energy savings. And in those situations, they'll claim the energy efficiency rebate and tax credit, and their return on investment or payback is generally 2 to 5 years.
Okay, since you mentioned it, the IRA on this, it complies with the investment tax credit. So I'm assuming that it's got that 30%. Is it also U.S. content, and they get 40% on the ITC?
Could be.
Putting you on the spot there.
Yeah, it could be. So yeah, our by the way, the covers we make today have a totally domestic supply chain, with the exception of the fan, which is made in China. The U.S. doesn't make fans anymore. We do also offer an international offering. This is a double word, but yeah. So you can have a totally domestic cozy, or you can have a cozy made overseas. We're still figuring out whether the totally domestic cozy, gets the 40% ITC credit as opposed to the 30%. But what's enabling here is, and what I don't think we covered yet, is in the Inflation Reduction Act, the cozy is considered a thermal battery or a heat battery, and that's because we're taking that radiator and insulating it and harnessing the energy, right, or saving energy for use at a later time, and energy is distributed via that fan. And when you're able to do that to a building, you open up a lot of really interesting possibilities. And it's kind of a great segue into our future roadmap, what we're working on today for these types of buildings to further decarbonize after they've already added cozies. How can they meet, the state's goals of 80% decarbonization by 2050 without ripping out those radiators and upgrading electrical and making holes in the floors and the walls? Mind you, these buildings are occupied, so that's probably unrealistic. But without doing invasive construction, how can they meet the state's goals for 2050 today? And that's what we call hybrid electrification. So I'm going to change the slide real quickly.
No, that's good, because I was going to ask. The question is, like, a lot of, we have some projects in Manhattan as well. And, I just realized that in no new natural gas hookups after 2025, right? That's it. Yep. Boom. And
I think that's for new buildings and for cooking gas, right? So if you're building a new building today, it's probably going to have a very good envelope.
I think it's for any new hookup. So like if I wanted to put a backup generator in that may be natural gas or a fuel cell or something, I don't think I can do that with a natural gas connection after 2024.
Interesting. I'm under the impression that if you need to replace a natural gas boiler in 2032, you probably would, but it wouldn't be a new hookup.
That's not a new connection then.
Gotcha. Right.
Yeah, got it. I was going to ask, because the same thing happens in the summertime, is nobody's comfortable in those old buildings. So tell us about what the future is and how you're going to and I've spoken to building owners, and they're scared to death. Like,
totally.
How are we going to meet this? And I'm looking at it like, what are they going to do? Come in, bulldoze half the island and rebuild everything? So yeah,
that's one of 4 options, right? Knock it down, rebuild it. You could probably get an electric building, right? And mind you, like electric heating in a cold climate is just super energy intensive. If you think cooling is BTU rich or expensive, heating is, the energetics of that are probably 3 to 6 times what cooling is. But regardless, you can make a very, very new, modern, passive building, and it would be very efficient. We're experiencing a housing crisis in most of our American cities, and we're probably not going to knock down our buildings that are occupied. So that's one option. Option 2 would be rip out what's there, right? So you get in the apartment, you rip out all the radiators, you rip out the existing boiler, and you pipe the building, you duct the building, you make it fully electric, and that will have obviously heating and cooling with high efficiency heat pump electric systems. That's hard to do in an occupied building. It's just the expense of it probably will come down, but it's 20 times more expensive than what I'm about to propose. So most building owners probably won't go for it because there's also no ROI, because the cost to actually heat the building the following year, if you're coming off natural gas, is more than what it was with natural gas. So it's not like an economically rational thing to do, but it's possible, I suppose. There's one building in New York City that's done it, and it's a dorm building owned by NYU, and they were able to vacate the building for a few years to do the construction. And then there's the option of doing nothing, paying carbon fines. I don't know how popular that will be. And then what we're proposing requires no invasive construction, no electrical upgrades, no core drilling, no mounting condensers on the side of the building or on the rooftop. We're simply doing the cozy as step one. I think we already talked about the benefits of that. So you get this, the legacy fossil fuel-based distribution system under control. And then we go through the building, replacing the old window air conditioners or through-wall air conditioners with brand new, high-efficiency window form factor heat pumps. So heat pumps, air conditioners that also have a reverse and do heating. And these heat pumps critically plug right into the existing outlet. They provide really, really high coefficient of performance heating down to, they're not cold climate, right? But down to, let's say, freezing. And they are built with our radio and a power meter. So we now can flex fuel. We can flex the heating in these buildings. So if it's 45 degrees outside, the heating will likely be coming from the window units or the through wall units. If it's 80 degrees outside, the cooling will be coming from the window units. Most of the building's heating and cooling will be from these window units, probably 300 days of the year. But when it's really cold outside, we flex back to the old legacy system, which is now much more efficient, right? You can still control your temperature. So if it's 20 degrees outside, the boiler's probably back on.
Sure.
And in a place like New York City, our heating seasons are 75 to 80%. 75 to 80% of the time, they're above 32 degrees. So with this very simple retrofit,
So the heat pump is a good solution for those, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That allows for, let's just say 80% decarbonization at way less than a tenth of the cost of traditional full electrification. So the state's goals are to decarbonize all buildings by 2050. We can get there today in a very economically rational way, in a way that requires no invasive construction. In a way that, we're talking about a couple of other really cool things, which we could certainly jump into, but it gets complicated. But if you're able to flex from electric to natural gas, you can now participate in all types of grid services. The cozy is a thermal or a heat battery, so you can delay natural gas usage and use electric, or participate in all types of DR programs, so to speak. And then the heat pump that we're making also connects to an additional thermal battery that can store 3 hours of cooling conditioning and 4 hours of heating conditioning. So that enables a whole lot more DR. And ultimately, we can, flex most of the building's energy consumption or HVAC consumption to electricity without raising the cost of heating that building.
All right, and, let me explore that a little bit, because I want to make sure that I understand. So
Sure. That was long.
No, the heat pump, the hybrid, the new generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You said also includes a thermal battery, and what I thought I heard was it will store both heat as well as will store cold. So. And then you use DR, which I'm assuming you mean like demand response.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
So you're kind of taking what has been around in the cities for the last 100 years, which is, I've got centralized chillers. Power's cheap at night. I'm going to make cold water or ice at night, and then I'm going to use that and not run the chillers in the middle of the day. You're sort of bringing that down to the room level. Is that correct? David,
now you're talking. It's almost like we're monetizing the legacy infrastructure in place, using that hundreds of pounds of metal in the radiator as a thermal battery. We're adding another thermal battery, and yeah, obviously we're the money's in cooling DR right now. But if you believe that our cities are going to shift heating over to electrification, I'm pretty certain that the DR in the wintertime will be a much more lucrative thing. So for today, on an apartment level, you can shift your cooling over to the middle of the night when electricity rates are, plummet to next to nothing, right? So you charge that battery up in the middle of the night, you use the energy during the day. It's a thermal battery. The round trip efficiency of it is 100% because the battery's in the room. Your cooling bills in the summer are greatly reduced. But in the winter, when you're using the window unit for heating, you're also going to do that too, because electric BTUs just are more expensive than natural gas BTUs. So we need to take advantage of time of use electricity pricing.
Who makes the decision? I mean, I've got this unit there. I'm the apartment dweller, right? I mean, I'm not looking at what's the grid price now at 2 a.m. versus, blah,
Totally.
blah, blah. I should turn this on. Well, how does it, who's doing the dispatch, the DR and all that?
Right. So we're doing all of that in the back end. The apartment dweller is determining what temperature they want the rooms to be. And the entire system is digital, right? So it can be dialed into all types of different preferences. But say someone wants the room to be 72 degrees no matter what, we'll do all the work on the back end and flex heating sources from the window unit back to the cozy radiator cover.
Sure.
And back and forth again and again. And you can dial in for the lowest carbon footprint. You can dial in for the lowest operational cost, highest energy grade. In New York City, we now post energy grades on the next to every, opening to every building. So the preferences can be controlled via building management, but the idea is the residents don't experience any discomfort. And we're piloting this today in 2 buildings. One pilot in Manhattan that's funded by Con Edison and NYSERDA, and another pilot in Brooklyn at a NYCHA campus, and that's funded by the Department of Energy and National Grid. So both utilities are really on board with this idea of being able to flex, because the resiliency that it provides is unlike the other solutions out there.
Well, I consider the state of New York to be heat pump central. There's more incentives for heat pumps, I think, in New York than any state in the country. Let me go in the shoes of the building owner here for a second. What would I be looking at that would say to this is a slam dunk, right? I should, and we'll get to how do I call you up and things like that. But I'm a building owner. What is it that's going to just hit me right in the face and say, pick up the phone, call Radiator Labs now?
I mean, you could be saving a tremendous amount on your heating expenses if you own and operate radiator heated buildings, or if you're in a co-op and you live in a radiator heated building. Not only could you be more comfortable, you could reduce that building's operating costs today in like a super economically rational project, right? That's number one. And especially if you're in a city, I believe carbon standards are probably coming. The good thing to get on board with this today. We are going to shift our transportation and our buildings and most things over to clean renewable electricity over the next couple of decades. And these older buildings that are unducted are going to be very, very hard to fully electrify. But we think we've created a solution that will get buildings very, very efficient and decarbonized today. I said 80% for way less than 20%, right? So it makes sense. And then if you think about what really happens if these types of buildings is their boiler plants fail most of the time in the middle of the winter, right? And that becomes a heating emergency, and they just replace it with a brand new boiler. So that adds another 15 or 20 or 40 years of carbon life in these buildings. When we install in a building, we're tracking everything, right? We're tracking room temperature all the time. We're tracking how the radiator steam distribution system works. We're tracking how much of a load these window units can handle. So when that boiler actually does fail, A, it's no longer an emergency, right? Because the window units can provide the supplemental heat needed. But B, we can downsize the boiler or even maybe electrify it. We know exactly what the building needs. And we'll be tracking that at all times. So that all presents in our dashboard. So it kind of plots a future to a totally electrified building for these older legacy buildings that are very hard to electrify.
So let me paraphrase for a second. So I'm the building owner. I'm in my building owner shoes here. I'm looking at, I can get a carbon footprint reduction immediately. Yep. I can get energy savings immediately, save money, reduce my carbon footprint, avoid fines, and I don't have to put up any money up front. Did I get that right?
That's all correct. So the value prop is really good. yeah, you should do it. You do have to do work. You do have to do work in apartments, and that's the only. I wouldn't say it's a drawback because it provides this great amenity to all the residents or people in the building. But that's the complexity. But it's not so complex. It's about an hour inside of a apartment, and we just went over all the benefits.
All right. So I, other than my son and daughter-in-law who live in that steam radiator apartment, I have been blessed not to since I was a student in college or so. So there's a lot I don't know, I don't understand, and I'm ignorant of the space. So what didn't I ask you that I should have that's important for people or building owners to know?
I think I'm going to return to the idea of fully electrifying, legacy 17-story masonry building of 150 apartments. It hasn't been done, with the exception of the building that I mentioned that's it was fully vacated and it was a dorm, so you could do that. Yeah. That might be possible in a really non-invasive way one day, and that's great if it is. But if you're very serious about whether it's having an operationally efficient building, right? If you're serious about your OpEx, or if you're serious about committing to decarbonization, and a lot of organizations make that a priority statement for themselves. This is going to be the lowest, the pathway for least resistance, and it's going to provide an economic return. So, I guess you didn't necessarily not ask me that, but I think it's a really important point that illustrates how we can really achieve decarbonization in our older buildings without the pitfalls that we were kind of aware of before or afraid of before.
So with Radiator Labs, I can look at this optimistic future here. Going back to my initial story, right? So my son and daughter-in-law might enjoy year-round comfort at a savings, which Correct. The building owner is going to pass through to their rent, right? Now, I'm not going to go.
Yeah, I mean, David, the last part, probably, probably not. Probably not pass along to the rent. But people will be happier. Less on-site carbon fuel production, or less on-site carbon emissions, more comfort, and that's kind of our motto at Radiator Labs. So I've been with the organization since 2019, but it's definitely been a journey since Marshall conceived of that thermostatic radiator enclosure, or COSY, in his Columbia University dorm room. We are nearly 20 people today, and we are growing. So if anyone is interested in joining our mission, please also reach out to us. We'd love to learn more about you.
Important to mention, the mission is much bigger than the COSY. The mission is decarbonizing buildings. You've got the hybrid solution and things like that.
Yeah.
So you're hiring. How do people get in contact with you? How they find you? What's their next step?
So we're radiatorlabs.com. I'm Matthew, MattheHew, at radiatorlabs.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Matthew Issacs.
Fantastic. If anybody, and again, your market is primarily the building owners, but the best beneficiary is going to be the residents. So you could have, I'll say, literally millions of happy customers out there. So I'm hoping that everyone who hears this tells their friends who live in these older buildings and things to, hey, contact your soup, contact your building owner and say, there is a solution to one of their biggest, plexing problems is energy cost, energy savings, carbon footprint reduction, avoiding penalties and things like that. And again, most important, making people more comfortable and happier. So Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it. We always like to get this really exciting stuff out to people. If anybody has any questions and you can't reach Matt, please reach out to me, Dave March at Exergy Energy, and have a great evening. Matt, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
Bye-bye.